We're warm and cozy here at the Nerman Museum at Johnson County Community College. But we didn't want to let a little winter keep us away from our fountains.
There are a handful of them that stay on throughout the course of the winter, and this week we'll take you to one in the historic Northeast.
Producer videographer Dave Burkhart hears about it from Matt McClelland on this edition of My Favorite Fountain.
This is my favorite fountain for nostalgic reasons. Reminds me of a time when me and the family and we just kind of would have a fun day when there was no responsibility or work or whatever, and parents were in a good mood and we were having a good time. When we were kids, my folks were hippies, and Saturday afternoon meant just loading us in the car and driving around, and my dad had this way of navigating that was just, well, we've taken enough rights, let's take a few lefts, and we'd meander, and at some point they get tired of us bouncing around the back seat, and they'd pull over here and like kick us out of the car. And we'd run around the fountain and just have a blast. As an adult, I mean, fountains, Kansas City's a barbecue town, everybody's got 5 favorite barbecue places. Well, Kansas Cityans all have 5 favorite fountains, and you kind of drive by them every now and then to see how they're doing, and you know, this has always been one of mine. And it's just it's a way to interact with, it's a kinetic architecture that you can kind of get out and be part of. I guess this fountain was kind of the center of our little tour, with the museum down the road and the Italian grocery store and the Kennedy monument across the street. Well, you know, we were talking early 70s, mid 70s when all this was happening, and you know, Kennedy's death was still pretty fresh, and I mean, he was a saint to my mother and the women in my family. One particular time I remember, we came up and the fountain was frozen, and it was about 6 foot tall, this giant mass of ice with like this little squirt coming out. And as a kid, had never seen a frozen fountain before. It was like, it was amazing.